All right, let's get started. Regarding grading of various things that are due, I'm hoping the first midterm would be done by tomorrow, midterm 2 by Monday or Tuesday. Unfortunately, because of grading of quiz and final midterms, the mini project, which I think I was a bit ambitious when I said weekend over here, probably more like Monday or Tuesday. So I'm hoping to get feedback to all of you for all of the mini project pitches by Tuesday or so. Any questions on grading, logistics, midterm? Okay. By the way, one quick reminder in case you forgot. If you do better on the final exam, then your entire midterm score will be dropped and get replaced by the final exam score. Okay. All right. So I guess last week we were looking at this problem of scheduling to minimize maximum lateness. So to remind you, here was the setup. You have n jobs, and the ith job is parameterized by two quantities. Ti is the duration, that is how long it takes to finish the job, and di is the deadline, so that's the absolute last day by which you should finish your job. You're also given a specific start time, so every job cannot start before the start time is. Without loss of generality, you can assume it's something like 0 or 1, depending on wherever you want to start. It really doesn't matter as long as there's a fixed time where everyone has to start later after that time. And the algorithmic task here is to schedule all the n jobs. So here's one big difference from the first interval scheduling problem we had looked at, where you're given n intervals, but they had a fixed start time and a finish time. And the job of the scheduler was just to decide whether to pick a given interval or not. Here you have to schedule all of them, and the algorithmic task is to figure out where it starts. Okay? And all of these scheduling are non-preemptive. That means once you start a job, you have to finish it. So in other words, once you fix the start time of a job, everything else about the job is fixed. So the finish time would be the start time plus duration. Right? So I said the finish time is start time plus duration. And what the algorithm is trying to do is come up with a schedule that minimizes the maximum lateness. Now the lateness of a job Li given the schedule is the finish time, sorry, there should be a -1 here. Finish time minus deadline minus 1. If that quantity is positive, that means you are late, then that is your lateness. If that quantity is negative, that is you finish before the deadline, you don't get any profit. So the lateness is still 0. Okay. So I said the algorithm has to pick Si, and here's the greedy algorithm that we were analyzing last time. So first we assume all the jobs are sorted by deadline, so D1 is less than or equal to D2, D3, and so on and so forth. And the way the algorithm works is you have this kind of rolling time which keeps track of when did the last guy finish, or more appropriately, when is the earliest the next job can be scheduled. So you initialize that to the initial start time, so you can only start at S. And then what you do is you just walk through all the jobs. Again, remember, they're sorted in increasing order of deadline, right? So the very first job to be scheduled is the one with the earliest deadline, and so on and so forth. And so you schedule, if you're looking at the ith job and F is the earliest time you can start, that's when you schedule it, and then the finish time is automatically that start time plus duration. And then you advance the next time something can be scheduled to be F plus Ti. Right? Any questions on the algorithm or the problem? It's been a week, so. Inside.
That's just the finish time?
This F in the algorithm? F of I is the finish time. But on convention is you actually have to finish fi minus 1 is the exact date that you have to finish by. Any other questions? All right, so it's not too hard to see that this algorithm runs in O of n time once you have already sorted them by the deadlines. If not, it's n log n to sort. And so the more non-trivial part here is to prove that this algorithm actually outputs an optimal solution. That is, it minimizes the maximum lateness of all jobs that are scheduled. And so to do that, we started analyzing this algorithm, and there were kind of two properties of a schedule that we're going to use to prove things. One is the idle time. Idle time is a maximum gap between any two consecutively scheduled jobs. So over here, idle time is 1 because there's nothing scheduled in this time slot. And without loss of generality, you can always assume idle time is 0 by just shifting things and squishing out all the gaps. And this can never increase your maximum lateness because everything is getting done earlier, so it can only go down. The second version, and again, this concept of inversion is something that for this algorithm we're only going to use for analysis, but later on in the course we'll see actually an algorithmic application of this concept. So we say a pair of jobs I and j is an inversion if two things are satisfied. I is scheduled before j, but its deadline is strictly after j, right? So if I have two jobs I and j, deadline of I is strictly after j, but the schedule happens to schedule I before j. Okay, so if this happens, this is called an inversion. And the way the greedy algorithm is set up, it immediately follows that the idle time of the greedy algorithm is 0 because you're just scheduling everything right at the earliest time that you could. And the number of inversions is also 0 because you're scheduling everything exactly in order of the deadline. So there is completely respect. The ordering of the jobs will respect the increasing order of the deadlines. So to prove that the greedy algorithm is actually an optimal algorithm, there are 3 steps. So the first thing that we proved last Friday was to argue that if you give me 2 schedules, okay, I don't care, of course they're the schedules for the same problem instance, but I don't care how they're scheduled and details except 2 things. If they both have 0 idle time, and if they both have 0 number of inversions, then we argue that the maximum lateness for both schedules are exactly the same. Okay? And then as I just kind of pointed out, the greedy schedule has 0 idle time and 0 number of inversions. And we're going to argue today that there exists an optimal schedule with 0 idle time and 0 inversions. So from lemma 1 and 2, lemma 3 would imply that the maximum lateness of the greedy solution is same as the maximum lateness of an optimal solution, and hence by definition the output of the greedy is also optimal. Okay? So that's the plan for today. So we're going to argue using what's known as an exchange argument to argue that there exists an optimal solution with 0 idle time and 0 inversion. But any questions on this structure, anything so far? If not, this is what I'm going to prove today. Okay, so again, we want to argue that there exists an optimal solution with 0 idle time and 0 number of inversions. And I'm going to state the lemma in a slightly more verbose way just to kind of exactly tell you how we're going to prove it too. Okay, so the first observation is we can always assume that there exists an optimal solution with 0 idle time, because if not, if there's a gap, you always squish things, right? And that can only help you. Okay. So the third lemma that we're going to prove, and this is the only thing that remains to argue that the output of the greedy is optimal, is we're going to prove any optimal schedule, let's call it O prime, and the reason I'm calling O prime and not the final O will become clear shortly, with 0 idle time So again, we have an optimal with 0 idle time, and we are essentially, in some sense, algorithmically going to convert this into another optimal schedule that has 0 idle time, but now has 0 number of inversions. Okay, but non-zero. Again, I'm using hash as a short for number, but non-zero inversions. Then we can convert O prime to O such that one O is also optimal, to O has 0 idle time, and most importantly for this lemma, O has no inversions. Okay. So what this is saying is, you give me any optimal schedule with 0 idle time, I'll do some processing on this, make sure I do not lose the optimality and 0 idle time, but at the end I have 0 number of inversions. Okay. So to make my life simpler, I'm just going to introduce some simple notation. I don't think the book does it, so this is just for the class. So given a schedule S, I'll denote idle of S to be the idle time of S. And second, I'm just going to use hash inv of S to denote number of inversions in S. And to begin with, we're going to assume that the number of inversions in O prime is strictly bigger than 0, because if it's already 0, we are done. We have our optimal schedule with 0 idle time and 0 number of inversions. Okay. So the proof idea is what's known as, it will be via an exchange argument. And instead of trying to hand wave my thing around it, let me hand wave it slightly less in the context of how we would do this for this specific thing. All right, so we do have our optimal solution O prime with idle time equal to 0. But unfortunately, the number of inversions is strictly positive, so that's what we don't like. And what we want to end up with is another optimal solution with idle time 0 and number of inversions also to be 0. And now, of course, there are many ways you could prove it. You could just directly come up with a procedure to directly convert O prime to O. But what we're going to do is baby steps. So we're going to kind of make small incremental changes each time, improving the situation of our optimal solution and end up with what we want. Right? So instead of, and in particular, what we're going to do is, instead of reducing the number of inversions to 0 directly, we're going to decrease it 1 in each step. Okay? So we're going to make some local changes, decrease the number of inversions by 1, make sure the idle time doesn't increase, it remains 0, and make sure you're still optimal. Right? So you're doing these local changes, keeping optimality and 0 idle time alive while decreasing the number of inversions. Okay? So let me call this very first guy O of 1, and then you're going to make one step, and we're going to see you kind of swap two jobs, and that's why it's called an exchange argument. And then in general, you'll have one transformation. The ith guy goes to I minus 1. Okay. And you essentially keep on doing this till you end up with 0 idle time. Now, let me elaborate a bit more on. So again, this transformation is going to be the same. It's kind of the same algorithm that we're going to apply each time. And the properties that we need from this is, if the original guy had 0 idle time, you're going to end up with something that has 0 idle time. So in particular, if you already had 0 idle time, this transformation is not going to mess up that property. The second one is if the initial guy had non-zero number of inversions, then the new guy will actually have exactly one less number of inversions. Okay, so you're making some meaningful progress towards what you want. And the third thing that you have to ensure is make sure you don't increase the lateness.
Can you move it up?
Yes, I can. Thank you. And we'll make sure that the lateness does not increase. Okay? So before I argue how you're going to implement this step, let's assume I can do this. Okay? So again, I have this black box match. Oh, and say. Uh-huh. I'm sorry. Oh, are you talking about? Are you talking about here? Sorry? Here?
So after you have the line to hold, and then you have to in the third line from the top.
Third line over here. Is this? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Is this what you're looking?
Yeah. What's the slash?
Oh, such that. All right, so what I'm saying is for the time being, assume I guarantee, and I'm going to prove the guarantee to you soon, that there does exist such an algorithm that will take in an optimal solution which has, you know, if it has zero idle time, then the output will also have zero idle time. If the original guy had non-zero number of inversions, the new guy will have exactly one less number of inversions, and the lateness does not increase. Okay, so let's assume this is true. And so if I have this, the idea is fairly simple. You just apply this transformation, say m times, so that you end up with O of m minus 1, such that the number of inversions goes to 0. So every step it's increasing by 1. You just keep on doing it till you get to 0. And so why would this be enough? So the first thing to note is we are assuming that in each step the idle time does not change, right? So we start off with something that's 0. That means once I apply it once, it will still be 0. And I apply it again, so it will still be 0. So every time I apply it, I'm making sure that the idle time remains 0, right? So this will imply that I get idle time is 0 at the end, just by the fact that this always holds. The second is by definition of when we stop, we have that the number of inversions in the last guy, which again, just notation-wise, is 0. Right? So this is exactly what we wanted. So this is also satisfied. But we also have to argue that the last guy is optimal. Right? So that's the final part that's missing from what we want. And this just follows by noting the following thing. I'm assuming every time you apply this, the lateness cannot increase. Right? So it can only go down. So what this is saying is, so let's work our way backwards. So if the lateness of this guy is no more than the lateness of this guy, that's no more the lateness of the guy before that, right? And you just kind of walk back through. So if you walk all the way back through, then the lateness of the very last guy is no more than the lateness of what you started off with. Right? And this, by definition, is the lateness of the guy that you had to begin with. So what we're saying is, now we have a valid schedule whose lateness is no more than the lateness of some optimal schedule. Since O prime is optimal, you cannot be strictly less. Right? So again, optimal is the one that has the minimum maximum lateness. And you're saying, I'm giving you a schedule whose maximum lateness is no more than the minimum maximum lateness. That means they have to be equal. Okay. So this implies as O prime is optimal, so assuming I tell you what this black box is, I claim we are done. So just talk to your friends for half a minute. Let me know if you have any questions. If not, the rest of the class, we are going to show how you can implement this box.